Hello everyone, I'm Chris, and this is a full recap of Invincible Season 2, released from 2023 to 2024. If you end up enjoying this video and want to see more from us, then make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know anytime we upload a new video. On February 6th, the Invincible animated series will be premiering its third season, only 10 months after the previous season's incredible conclusion. So since we already took a look through Season 1 back in 2023, which you can check out by clicking the first link in the description below, today we'll be running down everything that took place in Season 2 ahead of the new season's release, to catch you up on anything you might have missed. The season opens with an unexplained battle between Invincible and the seemingly once again resurrected Immortal. Although their brawl doesn't last very long, as the sudden arrival of Omni-Man quickly results in Immortal's death, with Invincible adding the finishing touches, before we then see a video message from Invincible being delivered to the people of Earth, warning them that the longer they resist joining the Viltrum Empire, the longer their cities will be destroyed and innocent people will be killed. Among those resisting the Viltrum Empire's rule is a man named Angstrom Levy, who we follow down to a hidden underground base as he returns from a mission given to him by Robot and Adam Eve to retrieve null energy, which they hope may help them defeat the two supervillains. Unfortunately though, the underground base is then suddenly crashed into by said supervillains, who they attempt to use their new energy-fueled weapon against, but it doesn't prove as powerful as they'd hoped, and Omni-Man's ultimately able to kill Rudy, while Invincible, not wanting to kill Eve, since it seems he still has some strange affection for her, just paralyzes her instead. The two then turn their attention to the rest of the Resistance, and prepare to first kill Angstrom, but before they can, he's suddenly transported through a portal that appears beneath him. All of this, however, is soon revealed to have actually taken place in an alternate reality from the one we know, as we now meet back up with our Invincible and watch as Mark uses his powers to help those in need and fight crime, partly in an attempt to make up for all the lives that were lost during his showdown with Omni-Man a few weeks ago. Mark still doesn't feel he's doing enough though, and so meets with Cecil to try and convince him that he's ready to work for him once again. But Cecil refuses, believing he needs more time to get his head on straight, and for now, he continues to call on the Guardians of the Globe, who are seen battling a giant that appears to have the mental capacity of an 8-year-old, and despite eventually defeating the giant, it comes after a ton of destruction, which Cecil blames on poor leadership from Rudy, who's still adjusting to his new body, and leads him to announce that the team will be given a new leader, the once again revived Immortal, as well as a new member known as Bulletproof, leaving Rudy greatly disappointed in himself. Let's now shift our focus back to that alternate reality from earlier, as the Maulers, while once again locked up in prison, are suddenly met in their cells by a pair of portals, just like the one Levi had been taken through earlier. So they escape through them and are met by another variant of Angstrom, revealed to be the one who lives in their universe, and to have the ability to open portals between dimensions, although not within the same dimension. The reason he's broken the Maulers out of prison, despite he and them clearly not sharing the same values, is because he needs their help powering a somatic encoder, which reads copies and writes human minds, so that it can transport the memories of hundreds of his variants into his singular mind, with him further explaining that all of their problems, like famine, war, climate change, and cancer, have already been solved somewhere else, and so he wants to absorb all the answers from across the multiverse to potentially save the lives of trillions. Ultimately, he's able to convince the Maulers to help him in exchange for sending them to any reality of their choosing. However, soon the Maulers' whereabouts are discovered by Cecil, who believes the best choice for this mission is Invincible, and so sends him over, with Mark arriving just moments after they'd activated the machine. And after they refuse to shut it down, he promptly enters a battle against the Maulers, which Angstrom attempts to stop by insisting that what they're doing is for the greater good. But Mark struggles to believe him, forcing Angstrom to call on several other Maulers from different realities to subdue him. They don't only look to overpower him though, instead beginning to brutally beat him to death, prompting Levi, not wanting his utopia to be built with blood, to remove the device from his head, in turn causing the machine to explode and seemingly kill everyone in the building, outside of Invincible, who's left once again traumatized by so many people dying as a result of his actions. Sometime later though, it's revealed that not only had Mark survived, but also one of the Maulers, and this universe is Angstrom Levy, who've both been severely disfigured by the explosion. And in Levy's case, that's not only physically, but mentally as well, as he seems to have lost track of which memories are his own and which are his variants, leading him to proclaim that he won't rest until he kills Invincible for all the lives he's taken. Despite the unfortunate result of his previous mission, Mark still continues forward, now once again working under Cecil, and is next seen battling and defeating Doc Seismic, now accompanied by an army of Magma Knights, before later taking on a mission in Midnight City, which has been a virtual no man's land since the Midnight Magician cursed the city back in 2002 to locate the new Darkwing, revealed to be the former assistant of the original Darkwing, Nightboy, who since his predecessor's death at the hands of Omni-Man has carried on his work. Although, unlike his predecessor, he chooses to kill those he apprehends. So Mark's ordered to take him in, prompting the new Darkwing to unleash an attack against him, which actually inflicts some pain onto Mark thanks to an exoskeleton the original had developed to even the field against enhanced individuals. But ultimately, Mark's still able to defeat him. Not long after this, Mark's called in yet again, as Cecil's learned that the Atlanteans are seeking vengeance for the death of their king, Aquarius, at the hands of Omni-Man. And since he's not around, Atlantean law dictates that his sentence falls to his next of kin, and they've threatened to erase the eastern seaboard if Mark doesn't accept his punishment, which is apparently to marry the king's widow. Upon arriving in Atlantis, however, Mark quickly learns that they've recently abolished their original custom, and so he'll instead be battling against the Depth Dweller, which proves to be incredibly powerful and capable of unleashing a shriek that actually harms Mark, leading Cecil to send in some missiles to allow him a chance to escape. Although one of the missiles ends up inadvertently freeing the creature from its shackles, allowing it to wreak havoc on the underwater city. So Mark's forced to head back down, and impressively he's able to quickly defeat the beast before it can inflict much damage. And for his efforts, Atlantis decides to let him walk free. Also requiring Cecil's attention, we see as he's informed by an interestingly still alive Donald that the Lizard League has attacked a bio-research lab. So he sends in the Guardians, who've been struggling to handle their tougher schedule under the Immortal, but are still able to defeat the villains, with some help from a new hero called the Shapesmith, who, although claiming to be a human, is actually an undercover Martian that had taken the form of the astronaut Russ Livingston, that had been overtaken by the Sequids some time ago, and his abilities convince Immortal to consider making him a guardian of the globe. The Lizard League and their army of mind-controlled soldiers, meanwhile, in the aftermath of yet another defeat, are seen being given a rallying speech by their new leader, Supreme Lizard, before he's suddenly shot in the head by the League's original leader, King Lizard, returning after some time spent in prison, and he expresses plans of turning this organization around. Having handled Doc Seismic, the new Darkwing, and the Atlanteans, Mark's able to take a brief break just in time for his first day of college at Upstate University, which he'll be attending alongside his girlfriend Amber and best friend William, the latter of whom he'll be dorming with. Although it isn't long before he heads off to Amber's dorm so the two can have sex for the first time. While they're doing that, let's shift our focus out into space and run through a brief history of the planet Europa, one of many planets taken over by the Viltrum Empire, which after the Unopans continued to rebel, wiped out just about their entire population, outside of a few who'd managed to escape to various Unopan outposts, where they started breeding camps to rebuild their population. This new generation of Unopans, however, were part of a genetic enhancement program to breed a soldier capable of defeating a Viltrumite in combat, and resulted in the birth of Alan the Alien, who proved to be their first and only success. Still though, Alan wasn't quite strong enough to battle a Viltrumite, so he was instead given a new purpose after the Unopans were welcomed onto the planet Telescira to join the coalition of planets by its leader Thetis, being made a planetary evaluation officer and sent to discover any being able to defeat him in hopes of finding an ally strong enough to withstand Viltrumite. And luckily for the coalition, this led him to discovering Invincible. Alan's soon given a new mission though, as after having just recently joined the coalition, the planet Acreon was subsequently attacked by Viltrumites, leading Thetis to believe that there may be a mole amongst them. So he asks that Alan find who this person is, although he doesn't get much of an opportunity to, as while eating dinner with his lover, General Telia, Alan's suddenly attacked by a trio of Viltrumite soldiers, Lucan, Vidor, and Thula, demanding to know where Nolan is and of what took place with him and Mark on Earth. But Alan refuses to tell them anything, and so they viciously beat him to the brink of death, with him only managing to still be alive thanks to a life support machine back in Telescira. However, he's shockingly soon taken off life support by Thetis, although it turns out to have been for a good reason, as Thetis believed Alan's body, when left to fend for itself, would recover stronger than ever. And this gamble actually works. Upon awakening, Alan's then hit with another shocking revelation, that being that Thetis is actually a Viltrumite, the only one to ever rebel against the Empire, before he learned of Invincible, and so he asks that Alan bring Invincible here. Speaking of Mark, not long after returning to his dorm with William, he's then shockingly met by an alien that shares a strong resemblance to a praying mantis named Nualzot from the planet Thraxa. Hoping to gain the one they call Invincible's help, and saving his planet from meteors that could kill billions. And Mark, although somewhat reluctant, is ultimately convinced by William to go help, despite Cecil ordering him not to. So after 6 Earth days, Mark finally makes it to New Alzat's home planet and is taken to meet their monarch, shockingly revealed to actually be his father, Omni-Man. We learn that after fleeing Earth following his blood-soaked attack against its people, Nolan drifted in space for quite some time and was prepared to end it all by sending himself into a black hole. But just then, he noticed a damaged Thraxan aircraft also falling towards it, and so decided to save those inside and return them to their world, and in return, they made him their monarch. Shortly thereafter, he met and quickly became romantically involved with a Thraxan woman named Andressa, leading to the birth of their son, who by the time he's introduced to Mark is only a few months old but appears much older, as the entire lifespan of a Thraxan is only the length of 1 human year. So their son, while still aging slower than the Thraxans, ages much faster than Mark. The reason Nolan's called on Mark though is because the Thraxans and his brother are actually in danger, as soon the Viltrumites will learn that Nolan had abandoned his mission on Earth and track him down, which could result in the deaths of everyone on this planet, so he needs Mark's help in protecting them. Mark's understandably furious upon learning all of this, shocked that his father was able to move on from his life on Earth so quickly, and that now, after everything he did, he just expects him to help clean up his mess. But unfortunately, there isn't much time to argue, as the trio of Viltrumites who'd previously attacked Alan arrive on the planet as well. So while Nolan attempts to hold them off, Mark's directed to the caves of Roclane by Andressa. They're soon followed into the caverns though by Lucan, who immediately overpowers Mark before then being intercepted by Nolan, who after a short scuffle manages to incapacitate Lucan by slicing open his stomach. With Andressa and their child safe, Nolan and Mark return to the city and discover that many of the Thraxans have been killed, greatly upsetting Nolan, who then suddenly grabs Mark by the throat, questioning why he's so hurt by the deaths of these insignificant, weak creatures, and Mark claims that this is how he should have felt on Earth. The two are then met by the remaining 2 Viltrumites, forcing Nolan into a battle against Vidor, while Mark's left to battle Thula, who he struggles mightily against, forcing Nolan to intervene several times while emphasizing that if he's going to defeat her, he'll need to fight to kill. So Mark does just that, and eventually gains the perfect opportunity to kill her, but he again hesitates, allowing her to stab him in the abdomen. But fortunately, Nolan, having killed Vidor, is able to quickly fly in and kill her as well, only to then be suddenly attacked himself by a returning Lucan, still just barely alive, and he leaves Nolan immobilized before finally succumbing to his wounds. Arriving shortly thereafter is a Viltrumite aircraft to take Nolan away for his execution, and as he's being escorted, Nolan urges Mark to read his books, before Mark's then met by the Viltrum Empire's second-in-command, General Krieg, who informs him that Mark will be assuming his father's mission to prepare his planet for their rule, and that, if he refuses, they will kill millions of his people. Following Krieg's exit, Mark's fortunately found by the surviving Thraxans, and eventually nursed back to health, and Mark, filled with guilt over all the lives lost because of he and his father ever stepping foot on this planet, spends the next 2 months helping the Thraxans rebuild their city until they're able to build him a new ship to return home. Ahead of his departure, Mark's met by a now much older Andressa, who asks that he take his younger brother with him back to Earth, since soon, no one else in his family will be left to raise him, and Mark agrees to do so. Upon returning to Earth, Mark first returns home to reunite with his mother, as well as introduce her to his brother and tell her of all that happened, which understandably frustrates her. But despite that, she accepts the child into her life for the time being. And since he hadn't yet been named on Thraxa, Debbie decides to name him Oliver after her own father. She isn't quite able to focus all of her time on raising him though, so she interviews some babysitters and eventually lands on April Houseman, who she was initially against hiring since April had been sent by Cecil. But April emphasizes that Debbie would be her boss, not him. After checking in with his mom, Mark returns to college to see Amber, although he's immediately intercepted by Cecil, furious that Mark went against his orders and is still yet to check in with him. And Cecil, having learned of his brother's arrival on Earth from the GDA's surveillance of Debbie's home, plans on taking him in to run some tests, but Mark refuses to let that happen, so Cecil's forced to step down. During Mark's time in space, Cecil was left to once again solely call on the Guardians whenever a threat appeared, who've been able to mostly adjust to Immortal's leadership, as well as form some notable intimate relationships. In particular, the Immortal and Duplicate have become romantically involved, in large part due to their shared understanding of repeatedly being killed, while Rudy and Amanda also go out on their first date. Now though, Cecil calls for all hands on deck as they've discovered that a spacecraft from Mars is fast approaching Earth. And so he confronts the Shapesmith, who they were able to deduce was a Martian, and forces him to reveal the truth of how he got to Earth, through which they learn of the possible Sequid takeover of Mars. While frustrated with his incredibly stupid actions, they still have him join them for their mission, since he's the only one with insider knowledge of the Martian spacecraft, along with Immortal, Bulletproof, Black Samson, Monster Girl, Robot, and Invincible, since the Sequids won't be able to possess any of them outside of Robot, who'll be joining them to offer his scientific expertise. In addition, Rex also suggests they seek help from Adam Eve, who, since leaving home some time ago, did her best to use her powers to help those in need, but was still somewhat overwhelmed by her and her parents falling out, causing her to act without considering the potential consequences, which nearly resulted in many innocent people getting hurt, and so she decided to cut her losses and return home, where she's now met by Rex, who actually does a great job of talking her through her recent failures and convinces her to join the Guardians on their mission to Mars. Thanks to Eve's abilities, the heroes are able to breach the Martian aircraft, and almost immediately, they encounter the real and possessed Russ Livingston and an army of Sequids, which launch an attack against them that is momentarily halted by Robot disrupting their nervous systems with a high-pitched pulse, although it doesn't keep them immobilized for long, so he has the team keep the Sequids distracted while he uses his suit to build an amplifier for the pulse, which once complete, works in incapacitating the Sequids and frees Russ from their control, with whom they hop on their ship and begin their journey back to Earth. Unfortunately, while most of the team was out in space, Rex, Ray, and Kate were forced to go off on a mission of their own to apprehend the Lizard League, as King Lizard, along with Iguana, Salamander, and Komodo Dragon, had unleashed an attack on and taken over a nuclear weapons facility. Much to all the three of the heroes' confusion though, the supervillains prove themselves to be much stronger than they're used to, with Komodo managing to kill every clone Kate throws at him, before grabbing hold of her final two clones, and shockingly smashing them into one another and to their deaths. So in retaliation, Shrinking Ray enters the skull of and kills Salamander. But when she attempts to do the same to Komodo, he instead snatches her out of the air and eats her, which she then attempts to combat by growing back to her normal size, but she's unable to break through and appears to be crushed to death as well, putting Rex in a state of shock as he continues his battle with Iguana, who he eventually manages to kill with a blasted charge, before then just barely managing to kill Komodo, although not without the cost of his own hand, as Komodo bites it off along with another charge, resulting in his head exploding. There's still one villain remaining, however, with that being King Lizard, who fires a gun at Rex's head to seemingly kill him. However, as he then begins reading off his list of demands over the phone, Rex somehow regains consciousness and promptly unleashes a brutal and fatal attack against King Lizard, before falling unconscious once again to be found by GDA soldiers, along with the still alive Ray, who manages to crawl her way out of Komodo's corpse, but is still severely injured. It seems though that Duplicate has truly passed, and her death proves to be very difficult for the Immortal, who claims that despite having suffered many losses in his lifetime, hers has broken him up the most, and leads him to indefinitely step away from the Guardians, leaving Cecil to give his position back to Rudy. And unfortunately, everything the team is going through right now appears to have possibly been for nothing, as back at the home of the real Russ Livingston, he's seen throwing up a Sequid, which promptly possesses him once again. Mark, meanwhile, after returning home from space yet again, goes to finally spend some time with Amber after repeatedly being pulled away from her for one mission after another. But it seems their time apart from one another has created a sort of barrier between them that they're both struggling to break through, leading them to each seek guidance from those close to them, with Amber talking things through with Eve, now living on her own again, and Mark going to see Art Rosenbaum. In addition to their conversation about Amber, Mark also brings up what his father had said about reading his books before he was taken away by General Krieg. And luckily for him, Art happens to have a bunch of them, as Nolan had written sci-fi novels to make money during his time on Earth. So Mark takes them back to his college dorm and reads through a few titled The Man with the Invisible Gun and Savage Planet, Savage Beasts, both of which appear to actually be based on stories Nolan had heard or lived through prior to his time on Earth. Sometime later that evening, Mark is tracked down on Earth by Alan the Alien, here to bring Mark back with him to Telescira per his boss Thetis' orders, who he informs Mark is also a Viltrumite who rebelled against the Empire. Mark, though, refuses to go to space again after having just returned from several trips, needing a chance to actually spend time with his girlfriend, and so he instead shows him his father's books, the stories of which Alan claims to have heard before, in which Mark believes could reveal ways they could hurt a Viltrumite. So Alan leaves to present this information to Thetis. Now let's turn our focus for a moment onto the seemingly revived Donald we'd briefly mentioned earlier, and who we soon learned had no knowledge of his death at the hands of Omni-Man. At least that wasn't until he ran into Debbie, who was noticeably shocked to see him. And so he visited her home to understand why, but she wasn't there, leading him to instead discover a pair of his glasses amongst the wreckage of the GDA surveillance home destroyed as a result of his sacrifice. So he then decided to take a look at the footage from that day and finally learned of his death. And after cutting open his own arm, he also discovers that he's been completely rebuilt, which he immediately confronts Cecil about, and Cecil reveals that this actually isn't the first time they've resurrected him, presenting him with the footage from the 38 other times where he'd sacrificed himself for the greater good, before he was then rebuilt. And it turns out Donald was the one who'd chosen to have his memory erased, not believing he could handle all of that trauma. And all of this prompts Donald to once again request they do so. Donald isn't the only one the GDA's rebuilt though, as around the same time, they release William's boyfriend Rick, now back at 100% after what D.A. Sinclair did to him, and is reunited with William by Donald. Rick, though, is left feeling that pieces of him are missing, and questions who or what he really is, eventually leading him to the roof of his and William's college, prepared to take his own life. So William calls up Donald for help, and upon arriving, Donald reveals to understand how Rick is feeling, since he's now about 98% machine himself, and while he struggled to live with this fact, he's now starting to realize that every time he died, it was cause he helped make the world a little better, just like Rick did when he fought back against Sinclair, and that they aren't just their bodies, but the decisions they make, the lives they change, and the people they love. And his words convince Rick to come off the ledge, as well as convince him not to have his memory wiped after all. On to another hero who's lived through many self-sacrifices himself, as we see the Immortal returning home, only to be shockingly met by a still alive Kate, who apologizes for faking her own death, but explains that she'd just grown tired of repeatedly dying, and so wanted to give up being a superhero to become someone else. However, she found herself unable to move on with her life due to her feelings for him, and so has returned so they can be together. Back to Mark now, as he and Amber prepare for their first night alone in some time, and it looks like this could be their first of many going forward, since Mark was able to convince Cecil to guarantee him 2 nights off a week, and the two quickly take advantage of this opportunity, flying all across the state before making a stop for dinner. However, their date is sadly once again interrupted, this time by the sudden arrival of a Viltrumite soldier named Anissa, who threatens to kill Amber along with everyone around them if Mark doesn't come with her, claiming she only wants to talk. And so Mark suits up and meets her in the sky. Anissa explains that her people have concluded from their studies of Earth that human civilization has less than an 18% chance of surviving the next 2 centuries without the loss of billions, due to the powerful of this world destroying their own home by stripping resources for themselves. And so she urges Mark to accept his father's mission and welcome Earth into the Viltrum Empire, believing it's the only way to ensure humanity's survival. Mark, though, questions why, if they really care about human lives, are they so willing to kill millions themselves to force them into their empire. And she claims that, while some of them do take pleasure in killing, they do not kill for pleasure, as dead humans don't benefit them in any way. Frustratingly, during Mark's encounter with Anissa, back at the GDA, Cecil's informed of a behemoth-class kaiju in the South Pacific closing fast on a passenger cruise liner. So Mark asks that Anissa, since she claims to want to save human lives, allow him to go stop the beast, and she actually decides to join him in doing so, quickly and suddenly flying clean through the kaiju's neck to kill it. Although thankful for her help, Mark still refuses to allow Earth to join the Viltrum Empire, prompting her to then unleash a sudden and brutal attack against him, barely allowing Mark to land a single blow, before sending him crashing to the ground and threatening to suffocate him to death if he doesn't accept his mission. But still, Mark refuses, so she's forced to remove her foot from his neck, since killing him isn't her task. However, she informs him that soon another will come, and if he finds Mark still resistant of his destiny, then he and the whole planet will pay the price. Anissa then returns to what's revealed to be a Viltrumite prison, although not long after returning, she quickly encounters Alan on his way back to Telescura, and promptly unleashes an attack against him. However, it doesn't have nearly as much of an effect on him as it would have previously, allowing him to land a huge strike of his own that immediately busts her open. Alan, though, is then rather quickly incapacitated by Anissa, or so it appears, as we soon see that he's actually pretending to have been knocked out in order to break into the Viltrumite prison. Mark, meanwhile, having fortunately survived his earlier battle, rushes back to Amber's college dorm, and after all that's happened, Amber's left questioning if they can make this work, tearfully telling him that, although she really wants to, she doesn't think she can live in his world anymore, and so the two are forced to break up. Shortly thereafter, Mark's rough night is made even worse when he receives a phone call from his mother, as revealed to be on the other end is actually Angstrom Levy, with Debbie and Oliver held captive. So Mark rushes home and soon recognizes him from the machine's destruction some time ago that caused his disfigurement, which Levy still blames on Mark, and so he now looks to make him suffer by threatening both his and his family's lives, prompting Mark to rush towards him. But this just allows Angstrom to send him through a portal to another universe, in which Earth is occupied by talking dinosaurs, before he's then transported back home just as suddenly, while Angstrom expresses interest in Oliver, since he apparently hasn't yet encountered him before throughout the multiverse. Mark then again attempts to attack Levy, but is sent through yet another portal, this time right in the middle of a battle between Prof. Ock and Agent Spider, seemingly variants of Marvel's Spider-Man and Doc Ock. Soon enough though, Mark is sent back home again, this time to find Levy threatening to drop his family in a dimension where the ground is 8 stories lower. But Mark doesn't believe Levy will actually commit such a dastardly act, since when they first encountered each other, Angstrom had sacrificed himself for Mark, which Levy refuses to believe, claiming he would never save him after all the suffering he'd caused, before angrily sending him through another series of portals to several different dimensions, including a DC-adjacent universe where he encounters Batman. Levy, meanwhile, continues to struggle to understand why he would ever help Invincible, causing him to begin reliving the memories of his many variants now stored in his one mind, each of which see Invincible mercilessly killing innocent people, including some of Levy's loved ones, before he's then suddenly attacked from behind by Debbie, smashing a vase over his head and slashing him across the chest with a shard. But she's quickly stopped in her tracks as she attempts to escape by Angstrom smashing her through a table, before brutally breaking her arm. And now, even more furious, he proclaims that he not only plans on making Mark hurt, but her and Oliver too. He then finally returns Mark back to this dimension. However, this time, Mark manages to get the jump on him, and after seeing what he'd done to his mother, Mark sends him flying out of their home and unleashes a brutal attack against him. Although much to Mark's surprise, Angstrom soon manages to overpower him, revealing that he'd had his body enhanced by the greatest doctors across the multiverse, and had only been sending Mark through dimensions to soften him up so that he can kill him himself. He then sends Mark crashing through dimensions yet again, although this time whilst unleashing an attack of his own against him, and he claims he won't stop until he and his family are dead, a threat that appears to unlock something in Mark, who manages to regain the upper hand and unleashes every bit of strength and anger built up inside him onto Levy, while proclaiming he'll never let anyone hurt his family again, and his attack ultimately ends with him losing control and beating Angstrom to death. With Angstrom dead though, Mark's left with seemingly no way back home. That is until he's met by the future selves of the Guardians of the Globe, including Adam Eve, Robot, revealed to now be Rex instead of Rudy, Bulletproof, Monster Girl, and 2 heroes we haven't yet met, arriving through a time machine, who reveal that, in their world, Mark never returned home, and the world suffered as a result. So they spent the last 20 years searching for his location and building a time machine in hopes of bringing him back to his world and preventing their future from unfolding. So they open up a portal for Mark to return home through. However, before he exits, Eve stops him to confess her love for him, revealing she loved him for a very long time, and asks that he tell her past self how he feels about her so she can move on with her life, leaving Mark shocked as he returns to his dimension. Upon returning, he's immediately able to contact Cecil, who takes him to see his mother, and Mark, after revealing to her what he'd done, becomes quickly overwhelmed with emotion and tearfully falls into her arms. Sometime later, after Debbie's permitted to return home and their house has been rebuilt, Mark informs her that he won't be returning to college, deciding to instead focus on learning to control himself so that what happened with Angstrom Levy doesn't happen again. Also that same night, Mark finally reunites with Eve, who gives him a shoulder to cry on and helps comfort him. But while it seems the reason he'd come to see her was to address what her future self had told him, he's unable to do so just yet. Meanwhile, back in the Viltrumite prison, we see as Nolan is being prepared for his execution with a beating from General Krieg. After which, he happens to encounter Alan as the two are being taken to their respective cells, and the two, thanks to Alan's ability to communicate telepathically, are able to speak to one another, with Alan revealing he'd actually come here for Nolan, in hopes he would join the Coalition's cause, but Nolan claims he's accepted his fate, believing he deserves death for all that he's done, and no longer considering himself a Viltrumite. However, it seems his mind is then suddenly changed by his desire to see his wife again as the season ends. And that was our recap of Invincible Season 2. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful in any way, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And also, let us know in the comments below which season of Invincible has been your favorite so far. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.